trust in a negotiation is critical. People need to know that you're as good as your word, and that can only happen when you consistently prove that you are. And that's from Richard Branson, founder of Virgin Group. And I like to tell Richard Branson stories about negotiation. And the funny thing is that I was involved, Hamish, in a team that actually negotiated with Richard Branson's team directly.
Oh, really?
And the thing about that is that he's actually a really tough negotiator. Like, he was feared and respected because of how tough the negotiation was. But at the same time, clearly values trust, as you can tell from his quote on the importance of trust in negotiation. And with that, welcome to the House Einstein Podcast. This is House Einstein Podcast 60. I am your host, Osman Parvez, with the House Einstein Brokerage here in Boulder, Colorado, and with me is Hamish Crabb.
Hello. I'm not a founding broker, but I am an assistant to the team, and that's putting it lightly. I really help the team with all aspects of their day-to-day duties and work on the marketing and contract prep and all that. And I want to kind of apologize in advance. I've come down with a bit of a cold, so there may be some sniffles and some coughs in this pod, and my voice may be a little bit different than usual as well. Yeah.
I should, I guess, fluff that out a little bit with Hamish is our MVP at House Einstein, and he supports 3 full-time real estate agents, and that means he sees more deals in a year than most agents see in probably 10. And the average agent in Boulder County does 3.5 deals a year. And Hamish is seeing
losing
sometimes 5 deals a month and involved in the transaction in a material way, from understanding what's happening in the negotiation to writing contracts as a licensed real estate agent. He actually has a license, even though he doesn't earn commissions the way real estate agents do. He's an employee of our brokerage, but he is our MVP and is frequently involved in transactions. So when he dives in on a topic, it's not coming from inexperience after 3 years with our company.
You're too kind.
Well, it's true. I wouldn't say if it wasn't true. So we appreciate you being part of the team and also being on the pod. And our mission in the pod is to help you make smarter real estate decisions. But for all intents and purposes, this podcast is entertainment. And our attorneys, yes, force us to say that. So keep that in mind. Do not base your financial decisions, your relationship decisions, your spiritual decisions on anything you hear in this podcast. And if you are a client or would like to become a client, well, you know where to find us. You can find us at houseeinstein.com. All right, ready to talk about the topics?
Let's do it, yeah.
So today we're going to tell you, so in the segment we like to call Tell Me Something I Don't Know, we're going to share some tales of negotiation incompetence in real estate transactions and why questions about your agent's negotiation skill set are so vital to success in buying or selling real estate, whether you're here in Boulder or anywhere else in the country. And we're going to walk you through current market conditions in the city of Boulder as well as Boulder County. And then we're going to do a tiny little segment we call Shameless Self-Promotion. We'll talk about a couple of our deals that are in play. And then our segment on Sales of the Week. We are covering 5 sales, including one that will be brought to you by a special guest, the agent who actually listed the home. Will be joining us today to talk about that property. And then we do a segment called In the News, where we cover all sorts of relevant recent news, including the election. We will talk about the election briefly because I don't know how we can not talk about it. It is so present of mind for everyone in our country and maybe for many people around the world, what happened in this most recent election. But we are not a political podcast and will not be talking for very long about it. Yeah, there's plenty of other places you can go for that type of news. And then our last segment is something we call Carveouts, where we talk about whatever the hell we want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And
should be a good one.
Should be a good one. Yep.
Yeah. Good pod all the way around. We're Osman getting up to close to 1,000 listeners a month now. So I just want to also put out there, thanks. Really, really cool getting all the feedback, getting all the comments, and kind of seeing the podcast grow. So yeah, we're really excited to keep going and keep this thing trucking along and see who we pick up along the way. Yeah.
It's fun, and honestly, we also learn as we go through the podcast. It forces us to pay attention to market conditions. It forces us to look specifically at closed deals, so we can't talk about active listings or listings that are under contract. I want to make that clear because of real estate rules. We can only talk about closed deals, but in our usually monthly newsletter, which did go out last month and should go out this month too, reminder to self. Manifesting it must go out. We do talk about active and listings that are currently on the market but under contract. And that's the only place we can talk about it, because in our newsletter, we are communicating with our clients and our prospective clients only, although quite a few real estate agents themselves sign up for that newsletter, which is perfectly fine, but just know that that's not a public, on a billboard piece of content like this podcast is.
Yeah, exactly.
This podcast is sponsored by House Einstein. We serve buyers and sellers in Colorado, focusing on Boulder, Denver, and several mountain resort towns, including Breckenridge and Winter Park. Our mission is simple: help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn more at houseeinstein.com or our YouTube channel, where you'll find videos on neighborhoods, specific listings, and much, much more.
All right, something. Well, Osman, texting's kind of part of the job, but recently you got a pretty brash text chain that kind of prompted our "tell me something I don't know," didn't you?
Well, it's the fourth quarter, and the fourth quarter is a time to negotiate aggressively. It's a time when sellers who have been on the market all spring and summer and fall are exhausted and would like to be out. And they never imagined dealing with a listing that went this long. So they are far more open to negotiation. And for savvy buyers, this is a good time of year to target certain listings where the seller may be tired and ready to capitulate. And to proof of point, I've negotiated the biggest concessions from sellers during this time of year, with some caveats. If it's a story that involves something tragic and personal, I can't do it. Like, we're not ambulance chasers at House. We're not ambulance chasers at House Einstein. We're not looking for people that are dealing with tragedy in their lives and trying to take advantage of someone. So that is something I want to be clear about. But we are more than happy to aggressively negotiate. However, what is clear is that some agents have great competence and some agents are completely incompetent. And every time I run into a deeply incompetent counterparty, I scratch my head and wonder what they're doing and why they think this will be effective. And it's bizarre that they think that an aggressive approach like this, particularly when it's an agent that in theory has been licensed for a long time, why they think that this is going to get them what they want or get their client what they want. So what happened was we got a low offer on a listing that we've had for a while. And the low offer wasn't even really an offer. It was a text message. So let's start there. This agent, rather than pick up the phone and be human, right? Because, look, if it's possible to get a low deal together and our seller is willing to accept that low deal, we're going to still handle the transaction with a lot of communication and professionalism. And it starts, the right way to do this, in my opinion, is it should start with a phone call. Pick up the phone and have a conversation with your potential counterparty about the listing. And maybe you frame it up as, look, my clients really like this house. They think it's super interesting, or maybe I do, but I'm having a really hard time with your list price. I'm thinking about offering something, but it's going to be significantly lower than what is currently the asking price. How do you feel? How do you think that would fly with your sellers? Like, are they flexible on their pricing at all? And you basically, you don't start with those words. You start with, how's your day going? I wanted to just touch base. We saw your listing. How's the market treating you? Like, you warm them up before you start inquiring about their potential flexibility. And by the way, you also should do some homework on the listing itself. You should know what they paid for it. You should know how long they've owned it. You should also, if you're smart, you should be Googling who the sellers are if you can. and understand their situation. Sometimes their LinkedIn will show you they have another job completely on the other side of the country, and you might know their situation. They might have a Facebook profile where you might know what's going on with the seller, and there's no point in lowballing a seller that is already likely to be underwater. Like, you're unlikely to see somebody write a check for hundreds of thousands of dollars to close. This market's not, especially if they're well employed, like, it's just unlikely. It's possible, but we usually look to see how much equity they are likely to have in the house based on the last recorded mortgage and based on the last public transaction of the home, and that gives you kind of a ballpark on whether whether a seller might be negotiable. And then you pick up the phone and have that initial conversation. That's the right way, in my opinion, to begin the process. Hamish, you've bought and sold many cars, and it's like if you list it on Craig's or something and somebody just throws in like some crazy low number at you via email or text, like, what do? You laugh about it with your friends. I'll say too, right? Like, ideally, if you're, considering putting in an offer, a house or a car, see what they're going for. Houses are a little bit more of a unique case, but a car, you'll get the same model and find a sale history, right? If you're throwing out a low ball on a Hail Mary and there's no market data to back you up or anything, you're gonna get flattened. Well, I used to be pretty active in the motorcycle community here in Colorado, particularly dual sport bikes and adventure bikes. And I got to meet lots of people. And I remember there was a gentleman, I won't mention his full name. His first name was Mark, and older, like by 20 or 25 years to my age. And he had bought and sold, he said, dozens of motorcycles in his life. And he had gotten incredible deals, and he said, "This is how I do it. I schedule a showing on the property, on the bike. I come and see the bike in person, and then I meet the seller. I talk to them as a human, and then while I'm looking at the bike, before I even test ride it, I start pointing out some issues with it, like the tires are worn out, or what happened with this scrape down the exhaust, or
it's pulling to this direction, right?
Yeah, when was the last time you changed the oil, or when was the last time these brakes look like they're worn out? Suspension feels a little soft, but just, these casual comments and conversation and build a rapport, build some energy with the person, and then say, look, the bike looks great, but it's got all these issues with it, which you can see with me. How do you feel about 50%? And he comes up with some low offer. Very politely, I'll take it home with me if you'll take whatever low number. And he said that more often than not, they would agree to the low number, and he effectively would get incredible deals that he would describe as stealing the bike. And I think that was true, because these sellers, at the time, the market was soft, and they didn't need this extra toy, and they could see the flaws. They also felt a rapport with some trust with this guy, and they ended up taking the offer. And so it's not fundamentally different than really any other transaction. In fact, I think it's even more important to establish rapport before you launch in with what's the seller willing to take. And the worst approach is when they're like, this house is so stupidly overpriced. It's just such garbage.
Yeah, it's scrape. It's just the land.
I'll buy it right now for $1 million. And I'm like, really? Like, that's your approach via text message? And then, so what I usually do in those types of circumstances is I try not to get offended, right? Because
you want to see where they're coming from, right? You want to be like, really, $1 million, dude? $1 million.
Which comps are you looking at that support that price point that make you think that that's a fair number to sell this property for? And in this particular case, the agent was from out of town. They're from Denver. They had done no research into the market, and they couldn't. I know my comps is what she texted back with an exclamation point, but no actual comps, because I know the property's priced right. Like, we've done this homework every week. We do this.
We track the competition. Yeah, every week.
We know the competition. We know we have feedback from every single agent. And in this particular case, the layout of the property is a little bit of a challenge for some buyers, and that's why it hasn't sold. But it's not based on price point. It's based on a limited pool of buyers that are interested in a potential remodel and realignment of the layout.
It's unique.
And maybe there's an argument that it's a little high, but it comes with an offer after a discussion. and a warm-up and a rapport and establishing trust. It doesn't come with the first cold text message out of the blue. And so the reason we're bringing up this topic and the reason we do this segment, Tell Me Something I Don't Know, is that I believe the vast majority of buyers and sellers don't know how important negotiation competence is to your success in getting the home sold at a price that you find acceptable, hopefully a high price, or buying a home at a reasonable price, maybe even at a big discount. And I think that negotiation competence is something most agents should do a better job of demonstrating to their potential clients, especially now that the NAR commission lawsuit has made it clear that commissions are negotiable, which to agents should say, what are they paying for? And let me establish my value by talking to you about all the different ways I can help you get a better deal and earn my commission. And so I can tell you, having now done this 20 plus years, that there's a significant portion of agents that don't really know how to negotiate well. And they're afraid to pick up the phone, and that can frequently break deals. We had a deal last summer where literally the agent just refused to get on the phone with me to try to solve inspection issues, to the point where I had to call somebody else in their brokerage to ask, what's wrong with this person? Like, he's not returning my phone calls, and I'm asking him to call me, so we can walk through a resolution that works for buyer and seller. And he ended up leaving significant amounts of money potentially on the table for his client because of their approach in refusing to have a conversation to solve issues. So asking questions. Go ahead.
This isn't to say like negotiations should be easy or amicable either. Like, Osman, you've been hung up on negotiating certain inspection objections for clients before too, you know? And really quick before I lose the thought, I think I know the comps is like the real estate equivalent of I know what I've got, no low ballers for, you know, cars and stuff.
It is. If they're not willing to actually talk about what the basis of their number is, then you know that they have no basis for the number, which is fine. I mean, look, I've represented buyers where we're just trying to get a really good deal. And my answer in that case might be something like, well, this is what the most of my clients are comfortable with. Or maybe, you know, they're a young couple. This is the most they can afford right now, which I know is tugging at the heartstring of the seller who, you know, might be nearing the end of their life, for whom $20,000 or $50,000 is not a significant sum. But for a first-time buyer establishing a family, that's a huge amount of money. For some, it's all about winning, right? They're going to evaluate this on like some percentage basis of discount. That's fine too, but you should always establish what winning and losing is, and hopefully you have enough trust with your agent to have an honest conversation so they can best represent you and get you across the finish line. Your agent should also do a good job of showing you what typical negotiated discounts are, because sometimes people just have no concept of how much they can get off or what the comps are.
One of the most common questions I get, right, is like, they'll come to me and they'll say, you know, this house has been on the market for 3 weeks, you know, can we lowball them? And it's like, maybe, but here we've got a few steps before we figure that out, you know.
Well, there's always this fear
without giving too much away.
Well, there's always a fear about offending the other side. And unfortunately, that fear has some basis in reality. And even when the other side signals that they're open to a low offer, if you go too low, the most common response is nothing or a token discount. And so what you really want is to go low enough to get a response that's actually their real bottom line, or close to it, with some cushion for inspection issues. That's the goal. But the other magic ingredient is time. And so if your first offer is not accepted, then you have to wait before you resubmit. You should wait. That's the right strategic move. And good negotiation also involves a trade in concessions. Price is just one of those concessions. So we recently had a deal, actually it's currently under contract, so I won't mention the address, where the seller was not willing to budge very much from their list price. And so my buyer was willing to take the property and the price was acceptable, but we pushed out all the deadlines to give them more time. So instead of doing a very fast close based on cash, we did a very, what I would consider a slow closing, and it's still cash, but that was our counter, is that fine, if you want this price, then we're going to move out. We're not doing a 7 to 10 day inspection. We're doing a 2 week inspection, and we're closing at at 60 days, not 30 days or whatever, 45 days instead of 30 days. Like, we don't need the house right away. So we were doing that for you as an advantage to cash. And now you can take more risk that the buyer changes their mind midstream.
Later on. Yeah. And we're talking too, right? I think there's so many points for negotiation in the transaction. And we're talking really about that kind of initial offer. And perhaps in another pod, or maybe we'll get there organically, we'll bring up kind of another point in the transaction where there's, the negotiation strategy and keeping it amicable and also kind of a decent rapport with both sides is important throughout the whole deal. But we're really talking about that kind of like initial contact and that figuring out that first offer part of the negotiation right now in the pod. Yeah.
I think this applies to all things in life, Hamish. I agree. We could talk about the other stages of
I'm seeing more content here, maybe we can stretch this out. Yeah.
we could talk about good negotiation, bedside manner. That's a term I grew up with because my parents are physicians. I don't mean in a
Nope, you're good.
I don't mean it in a sexual way. I mean it in how you conduct yourself as a participant in the transaction. And doctors are well known to have bad bedside manner, where they blurt things out very rudely, abruptly, because they're so smart and they have other things to do. And it's really, the analogy I was going to use is that my wife and I are learning about massage. We bought a massage table and we're watching YouTube videos. And One of the things I've learned is that as we practice massage is that you can't start too fast. So even though you might be a big and strong human being and you want to get in there and squeeze those muscles and release them, that's the wrong way to approach it. You really need to start slowly and warm up the human body to receive deep tissue work. You can't push in aggressively until the body's warm. So it means being very gentle with touch, very light, and checking in with the client on whether the pressure is acceptable or not. So this is very similar to real estate negotiation, and having the conversation about how you want to approach it with the counterparty should be between the principal and the agent. The agent and the principal you represent, that's the conversation. And the opportunity for buyers and sellers is before you sign a buyer agency agreement with a potential agent to represent you, don't just look at their years on the market as a proxy, because that isn't necessarily a good one. Although it is, like, the longer they have, you would hope they have better negotiation skills, but there's no scorecard for negotiation. Agents know that have been in the business for a while who's really good and who's not very good, who is pleasant to work with and professional and who is really not. And you can negotiate I've negotiated 6-figure concessions over ethos with a listing agent who is selling their own house, who insisted that she's never seen one for more than $7,500. And I'm like, okay, well, that sounds good. We're going to get some estimates. This is a few years ago in a neighborhood, actually we'll be talking about later in the podcast, in Prospect, that had an ethos problem, exterior finish insulation system. And
we have a pod on that too.
Yeah, it ended up being a 6-figure concession. And I didn't argue with her about $7,500 is the typical concession, even though that's what she offered up front. I'm like, well, that sounds interesting. Let me get some estimates. Like, there's no point, even though I knew that was a joke, and I told my clients that number's a joke, I'm not going to tell the other side to their face that your number's a joke, because all that's going to do is create tension in the deal, distrust in the deal. So you have to remember that when the other side says something in a negotiation, directly telling them they're wrong and they're idiots results in bad feelings between the agents negotiating, which it can be a tool. Like, cops do this. Bad cop, good cop. You bring in the other person who's not been so aggressive. So time is something to talk about. The general approach is something to talk about. And making sure your client is the one making the decision on the negotiation. So what I always tell my clients, and I just said this last night, is my advice is to do this. The agent is signaling that anything lower than this number is not going to be well received. We've gone through the comps and we know this number is actually quite reasonable for the house. That's totally fine. You want a better deal. I totally want you to get a better deal. But if we come in below this number as our starting point, as an anchor, we've now offended the other side's agent who's driving the deal, and the agent is somebody they trust. Do you really want to do, like, it's a strategic move to offend if you want to do that. And no matter what happens with whatever offer you're on the receiving end, you should always flinch anyway. But there's a distinction between flinching and actually being offended. And if you actually offend the other side, you are likely to get either a token counter or no counter. And I've been with those sellers that where the buyer so offended the seller in how they conducted themselves in the house and in person that our client said, tell them they can have $5,000 off. And then he said this, and you don't need to blurt this out, Hamish, because this is a podcast and we can swear.
Yep.
Without even me saying, how do you think that's going to be received? He said, $5,000 off is my counter. And you know how they're going to take that? They're going to take that as a fuck you. And that's exactly the message I'm sending is fuck you, you're not getting this house. And I was like, okay. And that's because he was emotionally attached to the house. And there was no way to talk him off of that because it was a very emotional deal. There was a family member who had passed. And I was like, okay, well, I get this. It's a dumb move strategically. And I'm not going to push that on. I didn't tell him that. He was very emotional and upset. So divorces can be really contentious and create a lot of emotions. Death can create a lot of emotions. You have to be really careful in how you conduct yourself in negotiations for real estate assets. They're not just, it's not like buying stock where there should be zero emotion. I've always had Facebook, and man, letting go of it for the current market price is just so painful. That's not going to happen. But with houses, it happens, and with vehicles that people have owned for a really long time. I personally told a buyer to take a hike because they were an hour late to a meeting, and I had and I just told him to forget it. And he's like, "Well, I'm almost there." And I'm like, "You're an hour late, like, and you didn't call or text. We're done. I don't need to sell this bike." And in fact, I didn't even really want to. I just wanted to create some room in the garage. And the fact that you're rude just tells me everything. We're done. Like, that's a really rude maneuver, is to be an hour late.
A friend, there's a really close following for these old 7 Series, the E38s, and he was selling his, and a buyer came and opened up the trunk, checking out the trunk, but then slammed it. Well, that car has a soft closed trunk, so you place it down and then you push it and it locks itself down. The buyer slammed it, and my buddy Sonia was immediately like, "Nope, sales off, you're done, you can't respect the car, it's over." And just like that was it. I had to laugh so hard, but it's like that, right?
There are signs, okay? So if a listing has been owned for a really long time and is a second home, or they raised their family in this home and they put love and care into this home, and you can tell by the improvements and the updates and the cutesy little messages that are not staging, like, there's emotions involved. So you have to be delicate, you have to be careful. And if you find out that there's been a death or some sort of family event, like a divorce driving this sale, you have to be doubly careful, because they will literally take a lower offer just to spite you if you disrespect them in the transaction. And so that's why the importance of the warm-up is so crucial. The importance of doing research is so crucial. And I love negotiation, but this is a skill set that is not marketed by agents very well. And buyers and sellers don't know the questions to ask to understand how a potential person who's supposed to represent you on $1 million plus transaction will then conduct themselves with arrogance and brutality and literally cost you the house. And the story, I've been that agent in 2009. It wasn't me that screwed it up. It was our client. So we were looking at a house
we talked about
in Arapahoe Ridge, right? And our client, the buyer, really wanted to get a deal, was very deal oriented, also had a really bad way of communicating, very arrogant. And we showed him the house during the week, and then he went that weekend to a garage sale at the house and deeply offended the seller by telling him how the house had all these problems and his price is ridiculous.
Oh, come on.
So, and then when we submitted our offer, they just rejected it. They didn't counter. And the agent told me that the seller had met the buyer at the garage sale, and our buyer was a jerk. Our buyer had come off really offensively, and they just wouldn't take this offer. And the house was overpriced. That was true. And it sat on the market for a long time after that. Our client moved on. They eventually bought a different house. And guess what happened? That seller eventually sold the house for significantly less than our initial offer on the house. It sat on the market a long time. They eventually agreed to sell it. They never called us. They never said, "Is your client still interested?" And when I inquired about this later, it was because of how offensive our buyer had been. They would rather take a lower... They lost money because of how offensive our buyer was.
And if you're listening to this too and thinking, like, well, money talks. It does, but if you go in and offend the seller to a point where they don't want to play with you anymore, you set a tone, and there's going to be inspection, and there's other contingencies in this contract. So if you set a tone up front of being kind of a jerk, you lost that trust for the rest of the transaction. It's not just that first offer. It's how, if something does come up in inspection that the seller doesn't know about, they'd like to be working with somebody who's going to be somewhat agreeable, or at least want to work towards a solution. But if you set that precedent, right, of being a jerk when you first put in your offer or first meet them at the garage sale, you lose that ability to kind of redeem yourself.
That's true. Conduct yourself professionally, communicate well, communicate with integrity. Don't play like it. There's another podcast. We'll talk about the games people play on inspections. It's a whole nother topic, but we do our best to keep our clients to behaving with integrity and communicating well. And there's nothing wrong with getting a really good deal. I love helping our clients get a fantastic deal, but there are approaches that are effective, and there are approaches that are a waste of time for everybody. And I just spent 30 minutes in a listing having a conversation about what are the approaches you want to take and how do we get there. And yes, you want a deal, but we need to. It's helpful if we hang our hat on something that is relatable, is human, preferably based in market knowledge, right? Like if the comps support a low offer, that's the best argument. And also that you humanize yourself, because when you receive an offer, you have no idea who these people are, right? And so it's really helpful to include a little note. The listing agent may or may not present it, even if there is no buyer bidding war. It's not a bad idea to include a little note saying, look, we really love this aspects of the home, and we really noticed your care and attention to detail. The kitchen is beautiful, and they invested 6 figures in that kitchen. That really it says something. You can also speak to your situation, which might mean that might be that you feel like this is the most you can afford given current interest rates, right? Our monthly payment is going to be very high, and this is going to stress us monetarily for a few years. But the
house is so dang compelling, we got to have it,
Right. We love all the care that you put into it. We will treat this home as you have, as an asset to be cherished by the family for decades to come, or whatever you want to say. But it's something that isn't like, hey man, here's
it's obviously 80%. A tear down, a millionaire take it.
Right. It's obviously a tear down. It's total. You're completely ridiculously overpriced. Here's 80% of. I'll pay 80% of your list price. Yeah. And we get those. Sometimes we used to get letters like that, and it wasn't even an offer. And you have to show. It's even though it's not a legit offer, you have to at least communicate with your client, and they never were effective. But for our clients, but for somebody that's completely desperate and is dealing with a tragic situation, perhaps they fall prey. But this is widows and orphans and taking advantage of people that are in compromise. Right? Yeah, compromised positions. I'm not doing it. If that's who if you want to be in the wholesale business, get in the wholesale business. But we won't be supporting it because it's unethical.
Yep. There's a reason you're no longer in Wall Street.
That's a whole nother topic.
Okay.
The ethics on the street. At least, let me say this: not every financial firm is compromised ethically, and I learned that only through direct experience. But the one I worked for in New York that's no longer around, I thought had some major conflicts and ethical issues that didn't feel comfortable for me. And after 9/11 in particular, I realized that making money was not the most important thing in my life. And so I was there, and that led me away from the investment world briefly. I did end up back with an investment company in Denver after that, and have been financial world adjacent. I mean, real estate is a massive asset class, but no longer at an investment bank. And not all investment banks are deeply compromised, but I would say most of them have a problem with ethics.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to derail too much, but I think we've talked this one fairly well. I want to leave some meat on the bone for us to visit, perhaps in another podcast. I know weather conditions. I don't know market conditions too well for Boulder. Osmond, what do you got?
Want to talk about market conditions? All right, it's time to move on. Thank you, Hamish, for keeping us on track, and so this doesn't turn into an 8-hour podcast. Okay, so we're going to do a quick walk through market conditions for the city of Boulder and Boulder County. But as a reminder, this is not the only markets we serve. We serve Denver. In fact, Sophie lives in Denver. We also love to do deals in the foothills, in the mountains, and resort towns. Basically anywhere from South Denver all the way to Fort Collins. On the Front Range is where we specialize. If you are a client that we've worked with before, I will actually go outside of that range because these clients would much rather work with me, and they're choosing me, and I tell them that I may not be an expert in a neighborhood in Colorado Springs, but I'll do the same due diligence and walk you through the same process, and I'll rent an Airbnb for the weekend, and we can go look at, I've done this, we can go look at 20 houses in Colorado Springs, but you just need to know that that's not my market, and they respect that, and typically they're asking me because they want to work with me, which I really respect and honor, but we need that pre-existing relationship. Otherwise, we'll refer you to someone in Colorado Springs, and our focus area is South Denver all the way to Fort Collins, and then Breck, Winter Park, of course, Nederland, Jamestown, Ward, all the little mountain towns and places in between. And then, of course, Longmont, Lafayette, Louisville, Boulder County. All right, so let's walk through just the data of City of Boulder and Boulder County. Okay, I just felt like I needed to say that.
Our golden child.
Well, this is where I live. This is also the market that we can't talk about every single market, but market conditions can vary right down to the neighborhood and street level. So keep that in mind too. All right, Boulder County. This is data for October. There were 341 closed single-family detached houses in the month of October across the county. And that's an increase year over year of 28.2%. So that's a pretty big uptick from last October. And it's a slight decrease, which is what you'd expect to see from last month. But typically that decrease is a little bit steeper, so it was kind of a mild decrease from September to October. September sales 372, October 341, and last year September sales were 392, and then they plummeted to 266. There was a huge fall off. And it's not atypical. Like in 2022, we saw 354 to 282. And I could do these percentages, but we don't have time for me to whip out a calculator. And I want to just express that this year's drop-off into the fourth quarter, October, November, December, has started off far milder than the last couple of years.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. When we were looking at the show notes and planning the podcast day before, the graph that you'd screen shared, it wasn't such a severe drop, as it usually is when we enter in the fourth quarter. It's kind of got this little, almost a plateau to it.
Yep. Yeah. So that was new listings, not all inventory. That's just the new listings to enter the market. And then homes for sale, which is all available inventory, 832 compared to last October, which was 683. So that's an increase in inventory of almost 22% across the county. 21.8% more inventory year over year, and the inventory again is not declining at apparently the same rate. It looks like a much flatter curve down, which shouldn't surprise anyone. There's more selection on the market, and that's what we've been saying for weeks. Under contract, 243 houses were under contract last month. That's an increase of 14.6% year over year. Closed sales up 16% year over year, so 275 houses closed, an increase of 16%. And then sale price, I got to be careful with sale price. So I'm just going to focus on price per total square foot because that's a much more realistic expectation of how the market has changed. And this is just the median dollar per square. And the median dollar per square across the entire county for single family detached houses was $331, which is almost 7% below a year ago. So the market, and if you look at the chart, you would see the market is pretty much flattened and downward from, the peak, right? The peak of this market, March of 2022. Actually,
I remember March 2022.
Yeah, March 2022, we were at 394 was the median dollar per square, and now we're at 331. So we can do that math really quick. I keep hitting the calculator button, but this keyboard was not set up for a Mac. Okay, 331 over 394 minus 1. So we're looking at almost 16% below the peak of March of 2022, 15.98. So let's just call that 16%. And that's the median. And that's in the county. So we're looking at a larger data set and a much broader area. So across the whole county, you're seeing a drop in prices from peak of about 16%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That all checks out, right?
Yep, that is exactly what we've seen.
Passes
and now
the
let's look at
sniff test.
let's look at the city of Boulder. Right?
Alrighty.
Now keep in mind a couple things. One, the city is being defined by InfoSparks, which is a product of Showing Time, and Zillow. And what they think of as city may not be exactly within city limits, because particularly in the city of Boulder, where there's a patchwork mosaic of county property that merges in a little bit. So when you're actually meeting with an agent to think about writing an offer, you want to drill down into a relevance for your particular client. So for example, I had a buyer that was looking at certain locations in town last night, and we defined it as west of Broadway, but not completely west. So let's just go a couple of a couple of millimeters on the map to the right of Broadway, and then all the way up to Linden, and then all the way down to Table Mesa, and then slightly into the foothills. That's their target zone. And we did the data analysis for that, looked at the last 12 months of sales, and came up with about 22, actually came up with exactly 22, now that my memory is going on to this, of homes that sold in the last 12 months that fit their price range and broad characteristics. And I sent that to them to look at themselves. And if you removed the obvious dogs from that data set, the ones that are on a really busy location or were completely tear down level homes, so you could basically throw out 10% on either side of the price range, take out the top 10%, take out the bottom 10%, and in the middle is probably about right for what you're likely to see in the next 12 months if we're going to continue to shop. So that data is relevant. That's really meaningful. But when you rely on Zillow or InfoSparks for data analysis, just keep in mind it's their definition of the city. Okay, and I can see your facial expressions, Hamish, that this is getting too long and I'm talking too much.
We're fine.
All right.
You're
but I think this is
engaging as always.
important. It's important to make these distinctions when you're talking about data. So new listings on the market last month in the city of Boulder, 84, up 27.3%. Keep in mind that Zillow may be disregarding refresh listings. If somebody has a new MLS number, they may consider that a new listing. It's not always clear, but 27.3% increase, 84 houses on the market, new houses on the market. Total number of houses, this number looks strangely low. Hang on a second. I want to make sure we're on Boulder City, not Boulder County. Something is strange. Hang on one second. Detached. Yeah, this is accurate. Okay. So there were 284 houses on the market last month in the city of Boulder, increase of 14.5%. Under contract, there were only 59 houses under contract last month. That's an increase of 1.7%, so a very mild increase. And closings, there were 4% more closings than a year ago. That's 77 deals closed last month. And then the median sale price per total square foot was $517, down 5.5% from a year ago. So there you have it. That is City of Boulder and Boulder County. And again, keep in mind detached and attached distinction. This is detached, not attached. And when you're actually getting ready to write an offer or price your home, it's a very different analysis and should be much more neighborhood specific, property type specific, and with deep market knowledge on what's going on in those locations.
To your specific needs, right? Pick up the phone, find us on houseeinstein.com.
Well, if you're not represented, if you are currently working with another agent and this is your agent and they can't do this data analysis, you need to fire them and then choose an agent that actually uses data to support their perceptions of the market and advise you. Like it used to be, Colbert's thing was, I'll feel you the news. And like feeling the market analysis might be relevant to that personal agent's experience, or it might be what they read about the overall market, but it's not specific enough for to be what we called actionable in Wall Street. Like for actionable information, it really better be drilled down to relevant for your specific situation.
Yep. Broad overviews.
All right, market conditions. That's it. We're moving on.
Nailed it. All right, some shameless self-promotion.
And we'll go through this pretty quick. We only have 2 deals to talk about. We've been talking about a new listing coming up in North Boulder that's mixed use, and our seller isn't quite ready yet, so we are delayed at least another week. We're getting hardwood floors refinished. We connected her to a contractor that is taking out some scratches in the hardwood floors. I was a little nervous that there wasn't enough material for those floors to be saved, but it turns out there is. So nice. that hopefully looks amazing. And she's going to move out of the property to some extent, so we need to work with her on her furnishings and artwork and make sure the property is properly staged. And then our listing at 1380 Knox Drive is under contract, and it is now past inspection, past appraisal, and we still have a few contingencies left in the deal, but I'm reasonably confident it's time to destage the house. And after the deal closes, I would love to have a podcast about we've talked about this before, how to handle inspection objections, how to think about resolving versus credits, and this deal has some interesting stuff to talk about, so we might discuss that in a future podcast. But that, unfortunately, for buyers, that house was so spectacular, and it was available for a relatively short period of time, but you really needed to understand small is beautiful in terms of the mentality of the buyer, and also the finish and construction quality. The architect, Trad, got involved. We had the house on the Hearth and Stone luxury house tour, got phenomenal feedback from the agents. It was really fun to see the other side of that, because I've only been on the advisor side and the tour side as a broker, but not as the agent receiving feedback. And that feedback was so high quality. So hat tip to Hearth and Stone, an organization that we strongly support and would love to see continue to grow in their success.
Yeah. I think as well, when it's all said and done, there's some negotiation that happened that I think we'll be able to dive into a little bit more, that kind of, it's some proof in the pudding from our Tell Me Something I Don't Know. So yeah, really excited for that.
Okay, let's jump to sales of the week. And to kick us off is House Einstein's own Ian Steinmo. Ian, welcome to the podcast. I should say welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's nice seeing you gentlemen on this frosty winter morning here.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, sale of the week, Ian. 4820 Baldwin was your listing, right?
Yeah, it was a great listing, great neighborhood. This is in Kings Ridge, which is one of the newer neighborhoods to Boulder, northeast Boulder. I think there's a ton of value in this neighborhood in general, and we've done a couple of videos on both Palo Park and Kings Ridge that you can find on our YouTube channel. Great neighborhood, nice properties, very appropriately priced, in my opinion, or generally speaking, what you get in this neighborhood for the price is really good by Boulder standards. And you're not that far from downtown Boulder, and you have easy access to the Diagonal and Longmont and, Lyons and Hall Ranch if you're a mountain biker, and Rocky Mountain National Park if you're a hiker. Anyway, it's a nice little neighborhood, and recently sold a 2-bed, 2-bath. We closed about 2 weeks ago. And in selling and marketing this property, I was able to learn a lot about interactive marketing and how we are kind of seeing a new trend in terms of how buyers are looking at property, or a resurgence really in terms of how buyers are looking at property, and that is the kind of open house model. There was a time where open houses were kind of pointless, really. They were, if we're being completely honest, a lot of listing agents were having open houses at their listings primarily to get more leads, to attract more buyers. And we
sort of like a relic of the industry, really.
Yeah. It wasn't like, open houses were something that were platforms where the neighbors would drop into a house to see if their house is nicer than the neighbor's house and casually check out what it sells for, And oftentimes listing agents were hosting open houses just so that they could meet other people who would buy a property that is separate from the one that they're listing, right?
Right.
And we've actually seen through two of Osmond's listings, which are high price point listings in Boulder, that we're getting good traffic at open houses. Not only good traffic in terms of the volume of people stepping in, but good traffic in terms of legitimate interests in the property. And to me, that suggests not so much that there's this big shift in terms of how buyers approach open houses, but I think that there is just so much pent-up demand right now. I mean, we are closing out essentially the third consecutive year of depressed housing activity, both in Boulder, in the state of Colorado, and nationally. I mean, it's difficult to overstate just how limited housing activity has been over the last 3 years since interest rates really took off in, spring of 2022. So 3 years in terms of summer housing cycles. Like in 2023, for instance, the total volume of homes sold in the United States was 4.1 million, which is the lowest volume of homes sold in the United States since 1995, right? Like literally the first term of Bill Clinton's presidency. It's difficult to overstate how limited housing activity has been since rates really took off in 2022. So I think that there are just droves of people out there who want to move, are thinking about moving, life changes, location changes, family changes, but they haven't really pulled the trigger because of election anxiety and because of decreased buying potential because of the interest rates. And so they're casually looking in kind of a meaningful way. And I think that's why we've had such effectiveness in our open houses that we've been doing.
Yeah, such decent turnout. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't do an open house in Boulder, but what I did do, knowing that there are lots of kind of people casually looking, my buyer alerted me, this is his idea, by the way, my buyer alerted me that the Boulder-thon, which is a 5K, 10K, half marathon, and marathon that runs right by this like private park that this particular property we listed backs onto, runs right by there. And so you get just thousands of people running by in the morning. And so what we did was Hamish helped me build out a QR code, and we put little stations basically on the pathway of the run leading up to the run the night before. We put these stations where there's these sell sheets, and people could either grab a sell sheet, which most runners realistically aren't going to do because who wants to, run with a piece of paper, but they could very quickly just pull out their camera and scan the QR code, which then linked to our the public version of our MLS. So we had a lot of people who weren't necessarily wouldn't step into the property normally, who were walking by the neighborhood or attending this event, who were able to scan in and then learn more about the property. And it did lead to an increase of showings during a period where showings have kind of slowed down. This is 4 or 5 weeks ago.
I was going to say, you got your first offer after the first weekend, right?
Yeah, we got 2 offers that weekend. Yeah, exactly, which is pretty good for, this market. So
I think it also probably helped that you priced it right and you marketed it well, and it's a neighborhood you really know. There's that video that you did, I think, 2 years ago on Noble Park. It's on our YouTube channel, Palo Park, but these are very, very adjacent neighborhoods. Kings Ridge, Palo Park, Noble Park are all kind of merged together, but it looks like a great listing, and it sold very quickly, so I'm sure your clients are pretty happy with that. And at a reasonable discount, so $10,000 below list, which people expect to negotiate a little bit. So that looks pretty good. Any hiccups in the deal?
No, really. The sellers really had taken care of the property. We got up ahead of a couple of things, and they were honestly dream sellers. They're organized. They'd taken care of their home. They listened to my feedback. It was a smooth transaction, and we had a lot of showings and decent amount of activity, and everyone was happy.
Yeah, nice.
Well, for Boulder, looks like a pretty affordable price point. So congrats to those buyers and sellers.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that moving forward, we're always considering how we can be the most up to date with kind of trends and how we market properties on the listing side. And I think that there is this really notable shift that people are just casually looking at properties right now, and you never know what that will turn into for our listings and for our sellers. And so I think interactive marketing within the neighborhood and open houses, properly done open houses, I mean, with one of us there, not just, you know, an assistant like a lot of big brokerages, you know, apply, someone who doesn't really actually know anything about the property. Someone who is informed about the property, who is physically there and interacting with prospective buyers. I think that there's a lot of value to that.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's
all right.
that.
Yeah, Ian, thanks for joining us, and we'll have you on again.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was great having Ian on board. Let's move on through the others. Our next sale of the week is 1280 Wildwood Road in Devil's Thumb. So Devil's Thumb is a small neighborhood that's part of Table Mesa. It's often grouped into Table Mesa. It's on the western side, and homes tend to be a little larger, and the lot sizes are a little bigger. The homes were also developed mostly in the 80s, some 70s. The architecture reflects that time period. Some of these houses have been updated, and the most interesting aspect of it, other than you've got better views and larger houses, is that you're closer to open space. And in particular, the western side of open space is NCAR, and I mean, it's really attractive. The Iron Pie building that dominates that landscape on top of the mesa is really just a lovely hiking experience all around it.
Yeah.
It has great views to the south and to the east. But the most important, well, maybe it's not the most important, but what I often warn my clients about is the electrical substation that is directly beneath that federal building to the south.
And across the street from this home.
Across the street from this home, but at least it didn't back to it.
Yeah.
So the houses that directly back to it, and there's like 6, 7. No, maybe with the cul-de-sac at Wildwood Court, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 houses, maybe 11 if you include 11 or 12. 11 if you include one of the ones on the corner of Wildwood Road. So let's call it 11 houses that are severely compromised by that substation dominating their backyards. Other than that. And this house is not one of those houses. It's on the other side of the street. It's a fantastic location. And if you happen to buy one of those 12, I'm sorry that your agent didn't warn you that the reason you're getting such an amazing deal is because so few buyers would ever consider living that close to an electrical substation.
Which,
EMF,
you're that type of buyer, so it might work for you. But it is just one of those full disclosure things.
Well, yeah, so you might be fine with it because you're an electrical engineer and you can barely measure the EMF in the house from that substation. You're getting more EMF from your refrigerator, and you know that, and you're just happy with the deal and you want to be in that location. But you should also know, and your agent should be telling you this, that the vast majority of buyers would not buy a home that is backing to a substation. And it's sort of obvious, but what we try to do is be a sounding board and make sure that our client isn't talking themselves into a bad investment decision. But this particular one is not that house. We just happen to mention that because it's an important feature in the neighborhood. So 1280 Wildwood Road, built in the early 80s on a large 15,000 square foot lot, 4,700 square feet, 3-car attached garage, very distinctive architecture on the outside. Maybe not distinctive for that time period, but today quite stand out. Originally listed at 2.97. Oh, no, hold on. Let's back up the bus. Originally listed in February at 3.3 million.
Wow.
And then after, and they ran. It's very interesting when you see listing histories like this. So they withdrew it from the market after almost 3 months, and then the first listing expired at the beginning of June. And I'm not sure if that agent got fired or not. It's not particularly relevant.
What I'm
but
seeing
a new
too
listing
is it was listed on
overlapped.
Colorado, and then removed, and now on iRes.
Okay, well, I'm only seeing iRes, but
Regardless,
I'm only seeing iRes on on the MLS. But with that said, they ran a concurrent listing, so they withdrew it May 1st, and they brought it back as a new listing May 7th, and the old listing was withdrawn but not expired. And so that's an overlapping listing. Now so the second listing period, which overlapped the first, started at 2.975. So they dropped it below 3. And as you know from being a podcast listener and being a newsletter follower, the market above 3 has very little inventory under contract. Over 80% of the homes above 3 million are just sitting there. So it's a buyer's market above 3. So they dropped it below 3, which was smart, but they didn't drop it deep enough. So that second listing period was available for 2 months and then expired. And then the property was off the market from July 15th all the way to September 4th. And it would not surprise me, given the 2-month period, might have been a holdover or something along those lines. But they might have fired that first agent. We don't know for a fact what happened, and I don't need to delve into it in this podcast. But it came back September 4th. So now you're into a much cooler time period. And this time around, it was listed at 2.775, much more reasonable. And it went under contract within a week and sold for 2.7. So that buyer negotiated another $75,000 off of the list price. And it sold for 2.7, closed out November 1st. And that's how the cookie crumbled.
Yeah. I'm pretty home.
Do you want to comment about the interior at all, Hamish?
I do. I like the brickwork throughout. I think it's really pretty, and I'm glad they kept it throughout the various updates. Yeah, the archway is cool. The accents throughout it, using it as a backsplash in the kitchen, it's a good look. With that lighter wood tone, too, it fits really well.
I mean, I think it's an interesting look. Dark brick is rather... So you see brick in historic homes, much more like pre-war historic homes. And it has a certain warmth and ambiance. But for some reason, this brick looks kind of dark colored. I don't know if there would have been a way to acid wash it or something to brighten it up a little bit.
I will say the TV frame, the TV stand, is a little industrial for me. A little too bare bones, almost. It just... Having the bars come out of the brick and do that look, it's not for me.
Yeah, I didn't really even think about that TV stand. It does not look freestanding either.
It just... it's very strange.
It's very custom.
Very custom.
And so is that wood stove. Very bespoke.
Yeah.
And a very unique look. And the furnishings inside are not staging furnishings. That almost certainly is the seller's stuff. And that circular stained glass window and the circular kind of pulpit in the upper level over the dining area, that's where you give your Easter, your annual your Festivus pronouncements about your complaints go up there. There's some aspects of the house that are a little unusual.
There's quirk. We'll call it quirk.
Quirk, I would say a little dated and very unique to the particular seller. And the tricky part with this type of listing is that the seller doesn't want to hear it, right? What they want to see is an agent that is in love with every unique weird thing they did in the house. And so agents sometimes pretend to be in love with every single unique weird thing. And what they should have told the seller is expect a long listing, because even though you love all the things that you've done, and I appreciate them too, they're very attractive, but they're not current in the way that people design homes today. And you've enjoyed the use of something you designed for you yourself, or maybe you had updated this way. But a lot of buyers are not going to be excited by it, so it might take a while to find the right buyer that really loves this home and the uniqueness of it. So prepare for a longer listing.
Yeah, I completely agree. Cool
Setting
find.
Expectations, Hamish. It's something that's really
a big part
important
of it.
with client management. And it reminds me of something my younger brother said growing up. He understood this as a toddler, or maybe he was in elementary school. He was in elementary school. And when I asked him why he was such a slacker, he was just upfront about it. He's like, well, because that way, whenever I do something, everyone's so happy with me. Like, they're just so thrilled when I do anything. So basically, the answer for him in managing expectations was
Keep
to be
the bar low.
Set the bar low, and everyone's pleasantly surprised. And I was just blown away by this approach. And so setting expectations for a seller with a beautiful but expensive house that's unique is really important. to know that it might take a long time, and then be pleasantly surprised if it doesn't take a long time. But in this case, it did take a long time to find a buyer that loved that house. So that's 1280 Wildwood Road.
Sweet. Moving to the north, briefly discussing Hearth and Stone a little bit earlier in the podcast. We checked out this location, not this exact home, but surrounding McIntosh Lake. This is 2931 Breakwater Way in Longmont.
Yeah, on the eastern side of McIntosh Lake, and on the southern shore as well, there are homes that are right up against the water, or very close to it, that have literal water views. McIntosh Lake is an incredible experience in the summer. I'm pretty sure they don't allow motorized watercraft. Although last time we were there on our stand-up paddle boards, there was somebody with an electric motor clearly cheating on this rule, but I didn't say anything. And maybe there's a carve-out for electric motors, but whatever. It's a location that if you have a house on the eastern shore, you can have both water and mountain views, which is really rare. And compared to Boulder prices, it's relatively cheap for these luxury houses with water and mountain views. So this is far north west Longmont. A significant drive if your locus of activity is going to be Boulder. But if you aren't attached to Boulder and are happy with, say, Longmont schools, this can be a fantastic way to own a dream house when they become available. But you could be waiting a long time for a home like this to hit the market, because there's not many and they don't sell that often. So I think like once every 2 or 3 years I see a house that has this quality of view, water and mountain views. And this one is not that old. It was built in the 90s. The last one I looked at had serious foundation issues.
Oh.
And whenever I see that in a house, I'm always nervous that it's a location issue. Like there's so much movement in the soil. So I would be advising a buyer to look really closely at the foundation in this location. I mean, we always say look at the foundation, but I would be even more I would be like eagle-eyed looking at the foundation in this one. The address is 2931 Breakwater Way, and it is a ranch with a basement that was built in 97. Total square footage is 5,236, which is generous for most people, and the basement was 2,600, so about the same square footage on the main level. The garage, you and I'm sure, Hamish, are noticing how many spaces it has. It had 4, and a really nice driveway entrance. And the agent did a good job of presenting the house in the photos. Listed originally in September, and it was available at 2.75 for almost a full month. So I would say a little over 3 weeks. It was open season on this house, and a buyer came along, and they offered a very aggressive low offer. And it was negotiated to 2.4, which is let's do the math on that, because it might be worth doing the.
Yeah.
That's
2.4
over 2.75. So that's a 13%, 12.7% discount from the list price after only a month on market. And that's what the fourth quarter is all about, is getting a deal like that on a pretty rare listing. So it was a cash deal. Agents that were known, I know both agents that were involved in the transaction. You can see the aerial photographs do a great job of highlighting the southwestern design of the home, the post and beam interior. I mean, this is a fantastic buy if you are in love with McIntosh Lake and looking for a family-style house in a location that is just spectacular. Also doesn't have the fire risk of actually being in the mountains, and you're right next to a giant lake. So if there is a wildfire, it's not going to get any easier for the helicopters to pick up water when it's that close. Walkout basement. I mean, some of the finishes are a little old. They're clearly original, but when you look at things like that lower level shower with the tile inlay, and even though that may not be your taste, first, it's only a shower, and two, it really speaks to the custom nature of this home.
Right. It's not cheap finishes. Well,
not cheap finishes.
Yeah.
Not builder grade. Not cheap. With lots of family-friendly features like that swimming pool.
I do have to feel for the photographer on this one. When we went on our tour to McIntosh Lake, Long's Peak was so much more vibrant and brilliant than these photos are showing. And that's just, a consequence of the day they went out to shoot. But I bet the Long Peak view is gorgeous from there as well. It's a little dark and hazy on this one.
Just another hat tip for you, Hamish. That's one of the advantages we have, is that we do most of our own principal photography and videography for most listings. Occasionally we'll bring in an outside pro, but our inside availability to go shoot it again if it's the wrong day fixes that problem, doesn't it?
It sure does, yeah. No kidding.
All I got to do is say, Hamish, go out and shoot it again, and boom, it's like you're there.
Yep. Sometimes I'm there anyway.
Yeah, we're frequently there. You don't need the phone call. You know enough that with the view on a day like that was not great, and maybe the time of day was also wrong.
Yeah.
So this is one of the challenges that with real estate photography, that the interiors typically look better on days that are overcast, and you don't want the light to be so low that you get harsh shadows inside. So this looks like I don't see any harsh shadows in the interior photography. But you really want the money shot of the exterior to highlight, you want it to be golden hour if possible. Some of the exterior shots, you want it to show an amazing, vibrant sky, and at least it doesn't look like fake clouds to me. I don't think.
I think it all looks pretty pretty. Yeah.
Fake sunsets are the worst. When you see those, it just disgusts me.
We have a personal gripe with those.
The other day, I had a client that's like, let's look at this one. We were doing a video call, and I helped myself. I'm like, okay, well, this house is just a normal Table Mesa bi-level, and there's nothing exciting about it.
Sky, yeah.
And what got you was the sky and the angle of the shot and the fact they did fake glowing windows. And as soon as we got to the third photo, they're like, oh. Okay, we don't need to see that one.
Yeah, I saw one
funny.
When you do sky replacement in Photoshop, it's the same sky. Well, you can select from a catalog, but typically you want to keep it the same sky. But they didn't edit the clouds, so it was exterior shots all the way around the house, but the clouds kept facing you in the same direction the whole time.
It's amazing.
I was like, well, there's your big giveaway, right? Like, okay.
This is a cheap photography set. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move to the south and east in Longmont to 1001 Neon Forest Circle. So clients sometimes ask me, which neighborhoods would you buy in Longmont? And Prospect is absolutely one of those neighborhoods. When it was developed in the early 2000s, it was a bit of a radical concept. Mixed use. It was called New Urbanism, and it involved a mix of retail as well as residential. Houses, standalone, detached, townhomes, condos, all mixed together, and with a very intentional street plan, and the most important component, a diversity of architectural styles, and a association that strongly encourages owners to paint the exterior of their homes in distinctive colors. So it's just a joy now that all the trees are tall, and you can see that in the first shot. It just feels so nice in Prospect, and it's a vibrant community that is really well integrated and has a diversity of ages in it. And there's some nice retail, so you can actually walk to a coffee shop. Last time I was there, I think Cave Girl Coffee was still there. I think it might still be. I haven't been there in a little bit, so I just remember that from a photo stack of our last deal there. And this particular house, built in 2002, agent that does a lot of deals in Prospect, an agent we've done multiple deals with that have all gone smoothly. And this home is a classic 2-story with a 2-car attached garage. And one of the things about Prospect is it encourages people to have carriage houses, and you're welcome to rent those carriage houses as a supplemental income stream, which a lot of our clients do or did initially to help afford it when they could buy, so that they could buy in Prospect, because it is a premium neighborhood for Longmont. It is not as inexpensive as some of the others, but then you get this really beautiful architecture throughout the neighborhood, and the ability to have that carriage house to generate a supplemental income source, or potentially have family members stay there. So there's an advantage for people looking for multi-generational housing to buy in Prospect. Don't be surprised if someday, Hamish, you see me purchasing something in Prospect so that we can have a place for my parents or my wife's parents to stay. in their older years, which they're rapidly approaching, and it's already done, right? It's said and done.
Yeah.
You don't have to create your own family compound. You have a miniature version of that. So this, in total, 5 bedrooms, 5 baths, listed at 1.45, but the original list price was a little bit higher. It was originally listed in June of this year at 1.5. It went under contract in August, and then for some reason that first deal did not continue. They broke up. It was not disclosed why. Let me look at the notes. Yep, there's nothing disclosing what happened to the first offer, but it came back on market. Not uncommon, maybe 1 in 5 deals do this in September. It was back, and at the end of the month it expired. It came back again at the beginning of the month on October 2nd. They dropped the price on October 7th to 1.45. 3 weeks later, another buyer locked it down, and that's what it closed for, was 1.45, which I think is actually a very fair value. But the one thing I want to mention about a deal where it goes under contract and breaks up is that if you're the buy side, you should always ask for a copy of the termination notice as part of due diligence docs. You may not want to write that initially into the contract, but you definitely want to ask for it in the future, because you want to know what happened with that first deal, and if possible even get that first buyer's inspection, because maybe it was a really scary inspection item. It probably wasn't. It probably was just a fickle buyer, or maybe there was something else that they decided they wanted to purchase a different home, so they terminated. You never really know what caused that first deal to fall apart, but that termination notice is signed by the buyer, so you no longer are just trusting the listing agent's word for it. And we strongly encourage our clients to ask for that if they're buying a house that was previously under contract, because it gives you more due diligence. But fantastic house, great location in the neighborhood. I'm actually a little jealous of this one because it's a house I would have bought.
Cave Girl Coffee House is still going as well. You'd be delighted to know. And a little kind of shout out for Prospect is there's a lot of cool street names as well. Like they kind of branded themselves on being non-standard, and it's working for them, and it makes a kind of vibrant, exciting place to live. Every time I've gone there, I've really enjoyed that area. Yeah,
that's a great spot. I mean, there's a hair studio, there's a bagel shop, there have been yoga studios, it's got a park, it's got activities that occur year-round for families. It probably has the most well-attended Halloween event in Longmont. It has a pizzeria, it's had breweries, I don't know if they're still open or not. It's got cool stuff. So, and it's also not very far from downtown. So if you decide that there's not enough retail inside the neighborhood, you're like a 10-minute bike ride from the shops in downtown Longmont. So the restaurants and shops are right there. It's super easy.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I often drag family-oriented buyers to consider Prospect, and of the ones I've taken up there, I would say half of them have decided Prospect should be on their list. It really is compelling as a neighborhood, for sure. Now let's move to the other end of the spectrum, Hamish.
To a non-compelling neighborhood? Yeah.
A location that I would have advised our buyers to not even consider. So we are talking about 610 22nd Street. And this is a 2-story house built in the 1930s. It looks a lot like a house I grew up in that was very Cape Cod style. Oh, look, it even says Cape Cod style right there in the description. Hey. So I'm pretty sure that this style of house was sort of designed by Sears and Roebuck and printed 1,000,000+ times all over the country, but primarily is in the Northeast. And it involves 2 bedrooms on the upper level, 1 bedroom on the main, and then if the basement is finished, you can do more stuff down there. I have memories of my dad finishing the basement in our Cape Cod style house in upstate New York, and that was the era where they did wood furring strips they glued to the walls, and then they attached very simple cut and stick up paneling, and you still see some of that in homes today that have been repainted usually to hide the original cheap wood paneling. And so that's what this house is. And from a deal perspective, it listed in April at 1.625. They pulled it off in July. They brought it back in August for 1.5. It was on the market for a little over a month before a buyer locked it down, but that first buyer bailed out October 6th, and it was available for another 10 days or so, 8 days, so about a week, before it went under contract again, and it sold at 1.438. In the notes of the deal, it says it was a cash deal and there were no additional concessions. And the particular house itself, from a finish perspective, that yellow door helps it pop. Interior paint looks a little dated.
Tile
but
ceilings.
Overall,
I wonder if it's that speculation here. I wonder if it's that asbestos tile.
Could be.
Yeah,
You're talking about
painted.
Yeah, that's interesting. Even on the main, tile ceilings are kind of rare.
Yeah.
So you probably want to have the tiles tested for asbestos so you know what you're getting into. They did a good job with doing color pops.
They did.
But all the finishes are pretty dated throughout the house. It looks like it has a basement kitchen as well as a main level kitchen. And the agent's smart enough to not... Nope, it says basement kitchen. Never mind. Which may or may not be permitted, so that's something to think about, particularly if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to Airbnb this. I've seen firsthand people that bought houses thinking, what a little cash cow, will Airbnb the basement, only to list the house on Airbnb and have the city knock on their door and bust them, require them to remove the kitchen, and kill the Airbnb dreams they might have had. So be really cautious if that's your investment thesis. Buying a house with a basement kitchen, or even listing a home showing the basement kitchen, can be problematic for the future buyer as well as for yourself if that basement was added without a permit.
Yeah.
Which is very common. And the biggest issue, unlike Prospect, which we just talked about, is this property's location. So if you're buying a property for your student, this might be the best possible location you could buy because you are steps away from campus and you're not particularly in the party zone either. But there are a lot of student rentals in this zone, in this particular spot. I know that firsthand. So the market really is limited to students. I would be extremely cautious advising a buyer who was not buying for a student to consider acquiring something so close to multi-story apartment buildings and CU and New Vista High School. It's like Studentville, but at least it's not right next to the fraternities and the sororities on the hill. But I would consider this a very cautious location to invest in. So that's just... And compromised. I'm sorry, but living next to the Red Cup Zone might be fun in college, but is horrific for all the other buyers. Luckily, I think that in the future they'll probably find somebody else in a similar circumstance that's looking to buy something maybe for their college-age child that they can rent some of the bedrooms to. That might work, but that's a typically smaller segment. I mean, the university is a very large thing, but the percentage of people that buy freestanding single-family houses for their CU student is relatively small. So you're usually better off buying something that appeals to a broader segment of buyer archetypes than just like a CU parent. But that's who this deal looks like it's focused on, and I probably would have advised them to consider a different location, but very cute house. And as long as the due diligence was done on things like asbestos and that and stuff like that. Yep.
Yeah. No, and one more thing before we move on, because I think timing-wise, it's time. Your kind of exit out of that neighborhood is Baseline, and that stacks up. There's a lot of people trying to get out of their neighborhood through Baseline, so that little spot, it gets loaded with traffic as well.
But the Taj, Hamish, the Taj is right there.
Well, the Taj is worth it. That kind of undoes pretty much everything else.
The Taj would undo my diet plans forever if I lived that close to the Taj.
We should go to the Taj. Anyhow, moving on.
On a cold winter day like today, the Taj would so hit the spot. Spicy,
no kidding.
Bottomless Indian buffet. We haven't done the Taj. Maybe we should do that as a team.
Yeah, Yak and Yeti's close to me. I might. But anyway.
All right, let's move on. Yeah. So that is our segment on sales of the week, and now we're going to be talking about the news. And we'll not be talking about the news too, but we'll be talking about the news. So Hamish, do you want to... Oh, actually, I'll lead us off. and you can talk about the item you've done some research on as well. So RTD has raised another $93 million from both the feds and the state combined to continue to develop the elusive Denver to Boulder passenger rail that was supposed to have been completed in 2019, and we are now 5 years past, and we're still waiting for our train. I think there's even been a news article called Ghost Train that NPR did about it, and we've been paying for it with our taxes for this passenger rail. RTD provided us with a bus rapid transit option that is universally disliked, I would say. Most people really dislike the experience, including myself, of riding the bus. I mean, look, I'm grateful it's there to take to the airport, but boy, is it inconsistent in its time to deliver. It's uncomfortable as a ride, and it just sort of sucks compared to a train.
Yeah.
Particularly for a lot of Boulder that would love to hop on this thing from where it should have been a stop down by the Depot restaurant, which probably will never be a stop because of the curve in the track. I'm dating myself by knowing all this stuff. That the city bought that land for the stop, even though it had a curve. And you can't have a curve. I mean, there's technology that can solve this to some extent. Today, I've seen it in
You just add
Japan,
cost
but
to it.
adding massive cost by buying something on a curve that's supposed to be where the train's going to stop. And I mean, this is Charlie Brown in the football. Peppermint Patty pulls. No. It's Linus.
Oh.
Who's kicking the football? It's Charlie Brown, and it might be Linus and Lucy. Oh man, I guess I'm too old. No, is it Linus and Lucy or Peppermint Patty and Charlie Brown? But any event, the football gets pulled right at the last minute, and Boulder is still waiting for its train. We will see. I mean, Polis is from Boulder and is likely to protect Boulder interests, but it's one of these things that we've been dreaming about for such a long time. And this train would go through Louisville. It would then come to Boulder. It would go to Longmont. Their lovely little map even has it extending all the way to Fort Collins, which I think is dreaming. But if it happens, fantastic. We would love to see it happen. And apparently we're going to throw $100 million more into the money hole.
It's a beautiful hole. Yeah, I'm stoked for it.
93 million. I'm exaggerating by 7.
It's a noble effort. No, the effort is a noble end goal. We'll see. TBD on the effort. Maybe there'll be a tell-all or something one day, but yeah.
All right. Let's hope and pray for our...
It'd be really cool to see some trains, yeah.
Look, if they ever make it happen, they needed to call it the Ghost Line. Because, forget about the yellow line. Let's call it the Ghost Line because we've been waiting for it so long that they should play with that tongue-in-cheek.
It'd be really
if we ever have the opportunity. There is a really good argument, by the way, that it's not worth it. That with automated driving coming, Waymo, and the ability to summon an automated car to your front door, it could be way cheaper to just have 500 self-driving cars running back and forth to the airport and to downtown Denver versus a train where you're negotiating for the track use and the infrastructure for the tracks, how expensive it is, and how it just doesn't pay itself back over time. It's really, it would be like
I think that's a topic for another day.
All right. We'll let it go.
I don't know. Trains have been proven as a concept, but
I mean, trains work in New York City and major cities, but all right, let's move on. Fed rate cuts is our next topic du jour, and today or tomorrow the Feds are supposed to cut rates another 1/4 point, and the Federal Reserve is what we're talking about, not mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are actually higher and likely to move higher because mortgage rates are more based on supply and demand, and they tend to track the 10-year Treasury. So the 10-year Treasury is also up despite the discount rate, which is a very short-term rate, dropping lower. I mean, we're getting a more standard yield curve, but what's happening is that unless there is a material weakness in the economy, it's very unlikely to see the long-term 30-year fixed rate drop or the 10-year treasury drop. And that's what a lot of buyers are sitting on the fence waiting and hoping for. And most agents don't understand the relationship between the discount rate and the yield curve, and how the yield curve moves in response to the economy, not in response, at least the mid and long term of the yield curve moves much more in response to the economy than to anything the Fed is doing into short-term rates. So we will see. I mean, that zero interest rate period, we may never see again in our lifetime, but clearly there's a lot of the market that would get unlocked if rates were back around 5% for the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. It's just my hope and optimism for that happening anytime soon is dwindling, because we've got this Goldilocks economy happening. It appears the Fed has engineered a soft landing, and
who would have thought it possible?
And the market's rallying after Trump's election. So, I mean, this is one of those things where you're praying for bad news, and it's just probably not going to happen.
Against your best, yeah, it's a tough one. I
Maybe
haven't checked
next
the markets
summer
yet. I'm pulling open my thing right now.
Maybe next summer or fall, but inventory keeps building. So, and prices have come down. So if you're sitting around, like we talked about that in our market analysis segment, we're talking about over 15% decrease from peak dollar per square levels. So I don't know how much cheaper you think it's going to get, but take advantage of that high inventory now, and if rates do drop, you can finance into a lower monthly payment, but you might be waiting 2 years for rates to drop.
Yeah, truly. Shall we?
All right, let's talk about our next topic du jour, Hamish.
Yeah. So, not really a huge news bulletin or anything, but we've discussed pretty briefly on previous podcasts about the Chimney Hollow Reservoir project. It's up there with Horsetooth Reservoir and a few other ones, kind of a little bit west of Loveland. Huge reservoir project. It's not actually stopping an existing flow of water. They are damming off a valley essentially and flooding it. And I don't remember all the names and the specifics, but they're flooding it with a reservoir that's quite a decent amount further away. And so it's just a kind of a backup water retention. Well, not backup, but it's another water retention device. And the reason I'm bringing it up, and the reason I think it's kind of pertinent, is pretty much since I've been paying attention to the world and things, is you hear about the scarcity of potable water and fresh water, and the kind of ever-growing need for it, and again, scarcity. So to me, it's nice to see actual kind of efforts in place put forward to kind of protect our water supply and also, think future forward. It's a massive project right now. It's the largest quarry in Colorado, and it's only a temporary quarry. They're also quarrying all of the building material for it on site, and eventually, the area quarried will be underwater, which is kind of neat. It's the second asphalt core dam in the U.S., which is pretty neat. Doesn't really mean a whole lot, but they shipped in a bunch of equipment and stuff from the Netherlands to make it work. So it's just a really cool project. I still have yet to go up there. I'd like to go up there. They were working 7 days a week or 6 days a week nonstop around the clock to work on it. But the news article and what will be in the description below is essentially that it's about 90% complete, and they're expecting to fill it next year. So really cool. Some perhaps more actionable things to know about it is there's a committee that's planning kind of recreational activities and trails around the reservoir and things that you can go and do there. I don't believe it'll be a reservoir you can recreate on, but that may change too. I like big projects, and I cannot lie.
I like it. That's a pretty good segment.
That's my outro.
Your outro of that. You like big projects and can't lie. Well, I'm on the other side of this, and this is one of those things that always cracks me up when I see commentary on Reddit or other types of social media, Nextdoor or neighborhood lists. You just automatically assume every real estate agent must be completely in line with development and want to support development and developers. And I hate to tell you, that's actually not the case. I grew up reading Edward Abbey, and Desert Solitaire.
I'm going to write these down so I can come back at you.
You don't even know what I'm talking about.
Nope.
The Monkey Wrench Gang and Edward Abbey and Desert Solitaire, Adventures with Ed, a book written about Edward Abbey by his friend Jack Loeffler, and also studied environmental science growing up in college, biology and environmental science and animal behavior. And the Glen Canyon Dam in Utah was about as close to an environmental sin as you could get. And it was because we needed water for development. And it was the fantasy of the Monkey Wrench Gang to blow up that dam because of how offensive it was to all of the things they knew and loved about the desert Southwest. And so growth is a limit. I'm not suggesting blowing up anything, for the record.
Yeah, get that down now.
That was the fantasy of the characters in the Monkey Wrench Gang. It also inspired a radical environmental group called Earth First,
Really?
who were like blowing up things and dumping sugar into the gas tanks of earth moving equipment and setting Humvee dealerships on fire in the 90s. So I definitely feel sympathy for those people, not condoning any sort of terrorist activity in any way, shape, or form. But I also did grow up believing the Glen Canyon Dam was a horrific environmental disaster and really against the desert ethos that you kind of have to struggle a little bit to enjoy the desert. And with respect to a development like this on the Front Range, I don't think that it's necessarily an environmental argument, but I do see growth being limited by water. That's pretty well known. Mm-hmm. And most of these water projects 20 or 30 years later are deemed to be really bad for the environment. So I'm not saying Colorado's full, okay, because I believe in creating opportunities for other people to live here. And at the same time, one of the downsides of living in a place as beautiful as the Front Range in Colorado is it keeps attracting people, and our population density continues to increase. And there's a sadness that's occurring for me with how dense Colorado is becoming with traffic, and we're kind of destroying our own Colorado experience by by continuing to build and build and build. And building itself is so environmentally disastrous, and most people that advocate for it on the left don't ever want to acknowledge how costly it is in terms of carbon footprint and other environmental costs, how much emissions are released in general from construction, how much waste. It's one of the I worked in construction for a year, and I was just shocked at how much we wasted, more than a year if you include the development on Nantucket. The amount of waste in construction is disgusting. So I'm glad you like big projects of like this, but I really don't. And as I've often joked,
I got to come back to you on a few points. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've told you, and I'll say it again. My slogan, if I ever ran for office in Colorado, is we're full. But it probably won't be a winning one.
I think this is less about, and I mean, of course, it's going to help for expansion, but this is more about protecting our water that we have here in the state for the people. Water hasn't been protected. It's an investment vehicle, and it's going to become more and more of an investment vehicle. So the water that is in this reservoir is going to be partially owned by a few different conglomerates, and one of the conglomerates is the government that waters the people. So that's where I'm getting at, is because like Nestle buys up the water rights in Michigan, right, and takes the water and then sells it back. This is what I'm more about, is like reserving the rights for the water for the citizens of Colorado. It's kind of more of that thing. And then it not stopping like an existing flow of water or like an existing reservoir or anything like that. I think there's a huge, the scale of this thing, there's totally a bad environmental impact. Definitely 100%. And reapportioning water, that would have naturally fallen on the other side of the slope or the Continental Divide and pumping it over to this side, that's going to have long-lasting, massive effects, no doubt about it. But it's not stopping like an existing stream, at least, All
right, that's fair enough, Hamish, but I do feel like I should add that the few deals I've done where water rights were a component of the valuation of the property caused me to realize how little I knew about water rights. Mm-hmm. And that there are experts in the field of water right valuation that we now refer to, because it is so complex. You have to understand senior versus junior rights, and then you have these ditch companies that set the value as a market maker, and yet you don't necessarily have transparency in what the actual trading value of water rights are. And so it's a really complex topic with valuation in general, but it also is complex to ask whether the water is being preserved for our existing citizens or whether water is being preserved for growth. And if it's being preserved for, it's not a, it does fall from the sky, but if you're taking like water out of the Colorado, for example,
Yeah.
where those people downstream are getting less water, right? So there's, I'm sure, effects that this article we're going to link to did not cover. And it's very easy for me to just generally say that I think big earth-moving construction projects to preserve water are universally bad until proven good. That's sort of where I'm at, is it's the opposite of our criminal justice system. I would prefer to assume they're guilty unless they're proven innocent.
Very valid, yeah.
Based on a history of how horrible these big-scale projects have been around the globe.
Yeah, fair. I don't know. My just general sentiment is nice to see some proactive effort taken towards water and water conservation. Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm with you, Hamish, on that. And I also, it's okay that we don't agree on everything. You don't have to. No. Your job is not in jeopardy for disagreeing with me.
The thumbnail, major fight.
Probably not. Probably not. All right, let's move on and talk about what we don't really want to talk about, other than I don't know how we don't talk about it, because it is affecting so many people in our community and the future of our country, maybe the future of the world, and that is the 2024 presidential election. We covered some of the ballot issues in our past podcasts, so we're just going to talk about the presidential election briefly. And one of the things I think I shared with our listeners in our last podcast, but I certainly have been talking about it with family and friends, was a hope that whoever won, it would be a decisive victory because of how damaging and uncertain winner would have been for our country. And it was a very decisive victory, as everyone knows, for Donald Trump. Yep. And I firmly believe we live in a country that we have an opportunity for freedom of expression, a First Amendment right to freedom of speech, to criticize the government. And we also have a country where upward mobility is greater than any other country in the world. I believe that to be true. It's true within my own family. And I've seen that within my peer group. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to live in this country. And at the same time, I feel really sad, and I'm concerned for all the people in Boulder, as well as anyone that's hurting around the election results. We've seen this. People are exploring leaving the country. People are exploring leaving red states and moving to blue states. I think that's likely going to happen, actually. We're going to see more mobility from deep red to purple and blue. And the other way around, maybe too, like the Joe Rogans and Elons of the world leaving states like California and encouraging others to do the same and moving to states like Florida. That trend is unfortunately going to continue to accelerate. But at least we had an election that was decisive, and
you say that.
now we're going to see what happens.
Yeah. Now we wait.
Well, what's your experience of this, Hamish?
Oh, I would just echo what you said. That's about all I got on this. Yeah, decisive is it. I know there was a lot of talk about, this could take 2 weeks and all this, but yeah, I woke up, I was saying in the pod earlier that I had a little cold. I got that cold the night of the election. And I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, couldn't breathe, and just went to the bathroom and pull up my phone, pull open the election results, and sure enough.
Yeah. I mean, for the record, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm an independent.
Same here.
I have voted for very liberal candidates, and I voted for very conservative candidates. Not conservative socially or conservative in a way that discriminates, but conservative fiscally. And I mean, I was telling Leah last night, I'm like, I voted for Ralph Nader, right?
That name's
I would
familiar.
have. You don't even know who he is. No. I would have voted if they didn't take Bernie down. I would have voted for Bernie.
Oh,
I was a
100%.
Bernie supporter, but the Democrats killed Bernie's candidacy. So I it's just, and I think I'll leave it at that. I'm not surprised by the results. And at House Einstein, we serve all people of all races, all genders, all gender identities, and all political persuasions and religious persuasions as well. We don't discriminate on those things. In fact, we don't even discriminate on your price range. A client asked me if we would help them. At least once a year, we do an affordable housing deal. And I never advertise it because, frankly, I don't want more of them. But we will serve you if you reach out to us and ask us to help you buy or sell affordable housing. They require more work and pay far less. So I don't advertise it, but I will happily work for you just as hard as we do for our multi-million-dollar deals, because we value people who value us. Mm-hmm. And our approach is to help people be smart about their real estate decision, but we don't judge people's politics or religion or color of their skin or any of those things. So I hope we can move on from this election pretty quickly.
Yep. I'm just glad I keep getting these ads for Yadira Karyevo and her opponent, Gabe Evans, I think, and they're on my podcast. They weren't even in my ballot, but I get their ads nonstop. I get them on Roku. I get them in my podcast thing. I get them nonstop, and I know their names, but I don't even have a choice to vote for them. I got them this morning.
Crazy.
The election's over. Like,
that's crazy.
Stop? Yeah.
Wow, that's nuts.
So,
well, all right. I don't think there's any need to comment on the election any further. It's not our lane, and we have no interest in alienating any of our clients, potential or past clients, irrespective of where you stand on this election. But I do feel for those that are hurting, and there are people hurting right now. And I just want to acknowledge that we care about our community, and we hope that the pain of this election is brief and that their fears are not realized.
Yeah, really well said. Alrighty. Shall we? We've got carve-outs. This is the fun. I mean, it's all fun. It's all fun.
It's time for carve-outs.
Yep. Shall I lead? Shall I start?
You should start, Hamish.
Okay. We're gonna. I'm gonna pretend as though there isn't a video version of the podcast on YouTube. So, listener, please close your eyes and imagine to yourself a ceiling. If that ceiling is painted, remove the paint. If that ceiling is not bare drywall, make it bare drywall. That's my current ceiling in the house. I purchased this house about a year ago and some change, and when I first got it, one of the goals was to kind of up the insulation in the attic. So we went in to do that, and unfortunately one of my friends fell through the ceiling, and in doing so, this is an older 70s home, and he's fine, don't worry about him, but it was an older 70s home. He fell through, and the popcorn ceiling had asbestos in it, so it got stirred into the air. Pretty quick decision right then and there, why don't we just scrape the ceiling? And so it's been unfinished for about a year straight. And, I did my kind of trip to North Carolina in my car and had a lot of fun, but I'm at the point now where I'm like, I'm not going to spend money on any other hobby until I get this ceiling finished. And so I'm a bit of a DIYer. I want to kind of give it a shot. So I've picked up a bunch of supplies, a bunch of skim coat. My theory is, and my idea from the University of YouTube, is to get a paint roller and roll on skim coat. I'm going to mix the skim coat with a little bit of water, or joint compound, a little bit of water and a little bit of Dawn dish soap from advice from my friend, and roll it onto the ceiling, and then use a very wide 24-inch drywall trowel blade and skim coat the entire ceiling of my upper level of the house and give that a shot. But it's a carve-out that'll be updated over the next few pods. The first step has somewhat been completed. I need to go get more drywall screws, but I've been drywalling or screwing up the ceiling more than it has been. So when it was built, they used drywall nails, and I've gone through with drywall screws. And in some places, Osmond, I'm seeing it sucked up like a 1/4 inch. Like the ceiling's been sagging that much. So I really didn't think it was needed, but it certainly is. And that's step one in the ceiling refinishing project. Next week, I hope to have a little bit more excitement for y'all.
It's sort of mind-blowing that they use they use nails.
No kidding,
in
right?
a vertical application where the weight is pulling downward. I have one question for you, Hamish.
What you got?
Did you mitigate the asbestos?
Yes. Yeah, I went through all the proper channels, and we put the house on negative air, taped off every single orifice of the home, and then put it through a asbestos filter, and we used a surfactant. I got to come in and do it. One of my friends works for a mitigation company, and he did it with me and for me over the weekend, which was really, really kind of him. He worked the full day Sunday doing it. And you know, keeping resale in the mind, I made sure to get a final air clearance as well. We didn't actually test for asbestos until after we mitigated it and did the whole work and everything, but the baseline results and everything showed that there was asbestos, but it's far, far, far below the worry limit now, and we're all good to go. So
that's good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Got that retained for my documents. No kidding.
Yeah. Now it's in the podcast too, which will be available for all future buyers of your house in Broomfield.
I'm going to have to be so upfront about everything with this house. Next Carveout, I'll talk about the 6-inch hole I drilled into the side of the house that was in the wrong spot. So now there's just a 6-inch hole.
I've rented that 6-inch drill bit and gone through the side. It's an interesting process to go through the brick and then into the house, and you better know where you're going.
Too. Yeah.
You have to know exactly where you want that hole.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about my Carveout.
Yeah.
So we are doing some remodel work. We are supporting the remodel work of one of our listings, and the floors are being refinished, and the owner is elected to replace the tile. And I helped them get estimates and hooked them up with a contractor that is working on the house right now. And I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest, but I volunteered to go pick up the materials, not thinking really how heavy tile stuff is. And even though this square footage of this
it's
space
pretty small area.
It's about 200 square feet. It resulted in me when I pulled up to the tile company, all the stuff on a pallet that they had ordered. Luckily, it fit into the back of my truck, and luckily I have a 3/4 ton truck that we use primarily for plowing the road up here in the mountains, and we use it to tow a big 20-foot trailer out to Burning Man every year. But I was really shocked to see how much the suspension dropped when they put the pallet in, and so I then bumped up the airbags. This truck is equipped with airbags, so the ride was stable again. And it was well within the weight limit of the truck's capacity, but I drove it to the house and unloaded it myself out of the back. And that's when I realized how heavy this stuff was. And the combined weight of all the materials, tiles, grout, mortar, all the bags of stuff and the tile was over 1,600 pounds. And yesterday my back spasmed afterward.
Shocker.
Likely related to suddenly going from not lifting on a regular basis to moving. I mean, 1,600 pounds is really not that much weight when you think about lifting, right? When you're bench pressing or moving free weights around, it's actually not that much weight. But when you're trying to get it done on a timeline and you're bending over into like a truck space, the truck has a cap. So you're bending over and you're picking up these 42-pound cartons of tile and 50-pound bags, and you're moving them 8 inches further back so you can then hop out of the truck. There was a lot of monkey-like movement, okay, in the course of 30 minutes. And then the next day, my whole front of my body was all sore from having done it. And then yesterday, my back spasmed, so I need to work on strengthening my upper and lower back to avoid back injuries. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that if you're remodeling a home and doing tile, don't forget to think about how much tile weighs, and you may want to get it delivered.
Yeah. Workout
and
replacement.
And the other Carveout past that is snow tires.
Yeah.
We were caught by surprise. It's been so hot and so comfortable throughout most of October that suddenly Old Man Winter showed up and surprised the heck out of everybody, including me. And on Monday, I had to take away 3 hours worth of time to just focus on swapping out tires. And that, of course, involves rolling them out of storage through the snow on wheelbarrows, bringing them to the garage, and squatting low and swapping on the snow tires. They're mounted on separate wheels for the Tesla. And then also on the plow truck, got both vehicles done. It took a few hours.
And they're big. They're 33 to 35 inch tires.
Yeah. So one of the things to think about that I will just carve out for you is if you are into overlanding and thinking it's cool to have 33s or 35s, don't forget to think about how much these things weigh. There's a really good friend of mine.
It tanks your mileage.
It does tank your mileage because all that unsprung mass is really... It tanks your suspension handling too.
Yeah.
It really hurts. But a good friend of mine converted an F550 dually into a single, and then put a giant camper bed on the back, and it's got a giant lift. And his wheel tires are well over 100 pounds each, and he needs a little crane to lift the spare into the back of his truck. It's so absurd that I'm like, okay, this is the extreme. And I love the guy, and hopefully he's not listening to this podcast, but I would never do what he did. He has like it looks like a Inspector Gadget style accordion steps that come down from the top of this camper bed to the ground. And I've been in it. It's a little sketchy going up and down those accordion steps to get in and out of his camper bed. For sure, you don't want to do it drinking. Definitely keeps you sober. But squatting low and swapping on the 33s, and I'm pretty sure they're 33s. I'll measure them later from the plow truck to the standard winter set. I don't think I'll ever go with big tires and wheels again. It looks cool, but it comes at a high price.
It does. Well, I mean, it's kind of functional too, where you live up in the mountains and everything as well.
It's nice to have 35s on the van, right? Yeah. With the 6-inch lift, like the van's tall, the tires are tall, you got lots of ground clearance, but you got horrible fuel mileage. It also creates instability on the turns, so you increase rollover risk dramatically. So it's just something to think about. Total carve out. We're back into car land.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, so heck of a week. Snow tires, squatting, and then moving 1,600 pounds of finished material from a tile shop to a listing. Yeah, all in the need to be helpful to our clients.
Above and beyond, extra mile.
That's how we roll at House Einstein.
Yeah.
Oh, and I did see a listing yesterday. I came down Logan Mill and over Poor Man, which had been plowed, but there's something about this heavy, wet snow that was really slick. And despite the Tesla on studded snows, it was really squirrely. And the Tesla is by far superior.
They're good,
way better than any mechanical system, Audi Quattros included. I've had like 6. The Tesla responds way faster. The electrical motors and the sensors combined, the responsiveness is amazing. And now it has an off-road mode. I don't remember it having that when we bought the car. I think one of the updates included an over-the-air updates.
With the Cybertruck coming out, right?
And it reduced the responsiveness of the accelerator. So it's
cool.
It really... it's called retarding the acceleration. Like it's very, very slow responsiveness to the accelerator, so you're not spinning out. And it allows a little bit of wheel slip without triggering the stability
ABS.
control.
Yeah.
It turns off traction control. I think it retains stability control, although I haven't tested it because that involves sliding sideways down a mountain road that I don't really want to do.
With a sure cliff off the edge, right?
Right, with sheer cliffs off the edge. So we're not doing that. But very impressed with Tesla's all-wheel drive capability mounted on legit snows, and got me to a listing yesterday that most vehicles would not have gotten over what I drove through yesterday.
Yeah. Just before, I've got a little Hyundai. It has never been good in the snow, but I came across a very good set of studded snows that are essentially brand new for a good price, and just driving around this week has been phenomenal. I slid once on a bridge that iced over, and that was it. Other than that, I've had no issues. But I'm also down here in the city where the roads get plowed and the snow melts quicker and all that too.
I mean, they plow the major canyons eventually, and they even salted them this time. But 100%, even if you live in town, I think it's really important to consider a set of high-quality snow tires.
They make a huge difference.
You see these posts every year. Can I get by with my all seasons? Yeah, you can get by, but you probably shouldn't be on the road because you're going to be driving 10 miles an hour slower than you would if you had snow tires. And in the event you need to stop rapidly, like somebody brakes hard in front of you, you're going to be slamming into them and you're going to lose control. So you'll find yourself wondering, why is everyone driving so slow when you've got snow tires on? Because
really
they're
was.
sliding all. they're sliding all over the place. They're totally freaked out, and you're totally comfortable driving. But you should still, of course, maintain those safe following distances and all the rest of that jazz. But it's really fun when there's no one else on the road and you can like tear down. And front wheel drive cars like yours, with quality snow tires, are like little mountain goats. They do great.
Insane.
All that weight on top of that front tire, those front tires, they do great.
Yeah, it's funny. I went from summer to snow, in 20 minutes. So I went for a little test drive, and the handling is so much more sluggish, and it's like it's hulky, and it feels like a big bumbling vehicle, versus how quick and nimble it was. But no, the peace of mind is above second to none.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that's it for the House Einstein podcast. Hamish, you want to give us a quick wrap up?
Oh, I can. Listener, thank you so much for listening and making it this far. We have alluded to and will be coming out with, I'm manifesting it now, a newsletter where we can discuss active listings, their positives, their strengths, and their weaknesses. So be sure to check that out and sign up for it on our website, houseeinstein.com. We also have a bunch of other content on our YouTube and our other social media accounts, which is all House Einstein. We always appreciate you listening, again, especially this far, and we love seeing the feedback. It's really cool watching this podcast grow, and we have a weekly planning session, and this podcast is, I think, one of our more enjoyable and probably one of the most fun things that we do. So it's really fun doing that. I can see you just looking in disbelief.
We love all of our work. I'm going to tell you up front, I love my work. But it is true that the podcast is a highlight of the week for us to create. We definitely enjoy it, and hopefully that comes across to you, dear listener, that it's fun and, of course, entertaining.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of fun. So, yeah, hope you had as much fun listening as we did talking. And we'll see you next week.
See you soon.